Pakistan has had a tough few years since the Taliban took over Afghanistan in 2021. Despite staying on good terms with the Taliban throughout the American invasion, much to Washington's irritation, once the Taliban retook power, relations immediately cratered, largely because the Taliban has continued to host a number of terror groups operating in Pakistan. There have been regular skirmishes along the Pakistan-Afghanistan border ever since. But things escalated earlier this month when Pakistan launched airstrikes on Afghanistan's capital Kabul, essentially signaling to the Taliban that Pakistan would now hold them directly responsible for terror attacks originating in Afghanistan. This sparked a series of skirmishes along the Pakistan-Afghanistan border that ended in hundreds of deaths. So in this video, we thought we'd take a look at this recent escalation and why even if a ceasefire has been agreed for now, a full-on war looks worryingly inevitable. So let's start with some context. For most of recent history, the Taliban and Pakistan have actually been pretty good mates. The Taliban were originally a faction within the Afghan Majin who were supported by both the United States and Pakistan in their fight against the Soviets in the 80s. Pakistan continued to support the group after its emergence in 1994, and many of its recruits came from Afghan refugees studying in Islamic religious schools known as madrasas in Pakistan. When the Taliban conquered Kabul in 1996 and established the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan, it received international recognition from just 3 countries: Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Pakistan. Ever since Pakistan has maintained relations with the Taliban, even after the US invaded and forced the Taliban out of Kabul in 2001. Unsurprisingly, this became a point of contention between Pakistan and the US, but Pakistan was unwilling to cut ties with the Taliban. Both because Pakistan correctly thought there was a chance the Taliban would return to power once the US withdrew, and because Pakistan hoped that the Taliban might ultimately act as a regional counterbalance against India. Even before they returned to power, the Taliban still had influence in southern Afghanistan, and Pakistan needed to keep them on side to prevent them from hosting and exporting terror groups from Afghanistan into Pakistan, including most notably the Pakistani Taliban, or TTP, who've waged a violent insurgency against the Pakistani state since 2007. When the Taliban did return to power, Pakistani officials apparently expected the Taliban to repay them for their support by cracking down on other terror groups operating out of Afghanistan, including the TTP. But that's not what happened. Instead, the Taliban mediated negotiations between the TTP and Pakistan, which led to a ceasefire from August until December 2021. But once the ceasefire expired, the Taliban just let the TTP continue operating inside Afghanistan, and TTP attacks inside Pakistan restarted with increasing frequency. Pakistani officials have also accused the Taliban of providing safe haven for other terror groups like the Baloch Liberation Front, a Baloch separatist group that has staged a number of attacks inside Pakistan recently, including a train hijacking in March early this year, which required a massive hostage rescue operation and ended with at least 26 deaths. For their part, the Taliban have always denied these allegations. But these denials now look pretty implausible. The TTP's leader, for instance, is literally based in Kabul, Afghanistan's capital. Afghanistan's role as a de facto safe haven has allowed these groups to carry out an unprecedented number of attacks in Pakistan. According to the Center for Research and Security Studies, in 2024, at least 685 Pakistani security personnel were killed in terror attacks or counter-terrorist operations, up about 40% compared to 2023, and the highest figure since 2015. 2025 looks unlikely to be much better. In the first 9 months of this year, 512 security personnel have already been killed in hundreds of terror attacks and counter-terrorism operations. Anyway, in response to these terror attacks, Pakistan has occasionally carried out strikes on TTP targets inside Afghanistan. But these were until recently confined to sparsely populated border areas. However, after a spate of terror attacks at the start of this month that killed at least 24 Pakistani security personnel on Thursday last week, Pakistan took things up a notch by apparently launching airstrikes on targets in Kabul. While Pakistan didn't officially claim responsibility for the strikes, the intended message was pretty clear. Pakistan was signaling that they would hold the Taliban directly responsible for attacks against Pakistan by terror groups operating out of Afghanistan, and that Taliban strikes in Kabul would therefore be legitimate targets for retaliation. The strikes also coincided with the arrival of the Taliban foreign minister in India, the first such trip since the Taliban's return to power in 2021. This is another point of tension at the moment. While Pakistani strategists originally hoped to form a sort of anti-India alliance with the Taliban, and India did used to be one of the Taliban's many enemies, the two countries have seen somewhat of a rapprochement in recent years, motivated by both a mutual antipathy towards Pakistan and a pragmatic acceptance on India's part that the Taliban will probably be in power for the foreseeable future. Only a couple of days ago, India announced that it would be reopening the embassy in Kabul, which was shut 4 years ago. Anyway, 2 days later on Saturday, the Taliban retaliated by attacking a number of Pakistani positions along the border. Fighting continued over the weekend, and on Sunday, the Taliban claimed to have killed 58 Pakistani soldiers, while Pakistan claimed it had killed at least 200 Taliban fighters. While these numbers are probably exaggerated, this was probably the most lethal skirmish between the two sides since the Taliban's return to power. Fighting then resumed on Tuesday and continued into the early hours of Wednesday when Pakistan launched more airstrikes on targets in Kabul and on Taliban army bases in Kandahar, Afghanistan's second largest city, with the latter strikes killing at least 15 Taliban soldiers. On Wednesday, the two sides finally announced a 48-hour ceasefire. But while this might provide some temporary respite, it's hard to see things getting better anytime soon. The Taliban have shown no interest in expelling the terror groups operating out of Afghanistan, and Pakistan has proved willing to escalate as evidenced by the recent strikes in Kabul. This combination of the Taliban's intrigence and Pakistan's combative posture is obviously pretty dangerous. Unless one of them blinks, there's a risk that they get stuck in an escalatory cycle, which is sort of what happened for the past couple of years that could ultimately culminate in a full-on war. This might sound melodramatic, but it's really not clear what the alternative is. The status quo is clearly unsustainable. It's almost hard to imagine any other country tolerating hundreds of security personnel fatalities every year. And the Taliban have proved remarkably unresponsive to even the recent airstrikes on Kabul. It might not happen in the immediate future. After all, it's taken the two sides a couple of years to get to this point in the escalatory cycle, but there is a whiff of inevitability to it at the moment. Now, this conflict between Afghanistan and Pakistan is constantly changing and updating as more and more outlets are reporting on it. Right now, there are 359 sources currently reporting on it, with most of the coverage coming from the left. If we dive a bit deeper, we can see that the left is framing Afghanistan's response as retaliatory and successful operations, and the right instead describing it as an unprovoked attack. This type of analysis is why ground news has been my favorite way to stay up to date with the news since 2023. So, I want to thank them for sponsoring this video. It's no secret by this point just how much we're fans of ground news. They've been longtime supporters of this channel and independent news media at large. Their app and website makes it easier to navigate the news. Ground News gathers thousands of articles worldwide in one place, so you can easily compare how different outlets cover the same story. Each story comes with a visual breakdown of political bias, factuality, and who owns these sources. And it's not just me. Ground News has even been recognized by the Nobel Peace Center for its impact on media literacy. And speaking of bias, their brilliant blind spot feed allows you to fully expand your media bias and find stories that are being disproportionately covered by one side of the political spectrum or the other. It's important to know the full story, and Ground News ensures you always will. If you're curious and committed to understanding what's really going on in the world like us. By subscribing, you're also supporting an independent news platform that's working to make the media landscape more transparent and balanced.